This is Chapter 9 of Stop the Chaos: How to Get Control of Your Life by Beating Alcohol and Drugs. This book is available on eBay, Amazon, and you possibly can check it out at your local library, although I didn't see it at the Seattle Public Library. I bought an extra copy of this workbook for $6. I searched Google shopping, and I got that in the mail a couple of days ago. This is an excellent workbook, and I took a class, and it was called SUDS at Clean Start at Community Psychiatric Clinic in Belltown in Seattle, Washington. They've now merged with Sound Mental Health, and so it's a program of Sound Mental Health now. I completed this book in 2017. I held on to this book, and I felt it very poignant book to help you gain control over your addiction with alcohol and drugs, other addictions you may be facing. And some people are addicted to chaos. And this book is called Stop the Chaos. I'm going to read the 12 steps. We admitted we were powerless over our addiction, that our lives have become unmanageable. We come to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us sanity. We made a decision to turn over our will and our lives to the care of God as we understood God. We made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. We admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. We were entirely ready for God to remove all of these defects of character. We humbly asked Him to remove all of our shortcomings. We made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amendments to them all. We made direct amends to such people whenever possible, except when to do so would injure others. We continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. We sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, praying only for knowledge of His will and the power to carry it out. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to addicts and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. Third step prayer. God, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of Thyself, and I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. Amen. Chapter 9, Dealing with Emotions. As addicts and alcoholics, we're notorious for not wanting to talk about what's bothering us. When we were using, we couldn't talk about our problems for fear someone would discover how severe our addiction was. We may have learned early in life that problems were not to be discussed openly. We may believe that to open up about how we feel leaves us vulnerable to manipulation or rejection by others. Many of us used alcohol and other drugs for years to cope with the normal emotions of everyday life. It seemed that we were extremely sensitive to stress and to bad feelings. Whether by choice or by chance, we lack the ability to deal with our feelings in a responsible manner. Learning to talk about feelings is a critical part of recovery. To remain sober, we must learn the skills to deal with our emotions. Failure to do so leads us back to chemical use. When we're troubled, we need to discuss our feelings with other people in recovery. When we share our feelings of anger, shame, or fear, we take a load off our shoulders, and we usually get some worthwhile feedback. While this can be comforting, reassuring, and even inspirational, we need to remember the saying, "My head is a dangerous neighborhood to be in alone." Getting out with other people and keeping ourselves busy with positive recovery activities will leave little time for thinking about our troubles. We may have to discuss our feelings frequently with different people to reduce the level of anger, fear, and shame. We also need to listen to what others are saying to us. Feedback helps us see another perspective. Talking to one person about trouble and issue is seldom enough. Not everyone understands how addicts and alcoholics think. When dealing with troublesome emotions, we need to use coping skills, communicate with others, and make changes. Using coping skills. Learn to express feelings and concerns. Keep realistic expectations of the world and ourselves. Be honest with ourselves and others. We should keep no secrets and tell no lies. Seek professional help. If certain emotions are disrupting our lives, a psychologist or therapist who is experienced in dealing with recovering people can help us develop the skills we need to feel better. Communicate with others. Ask for help. This is crucial. We should never try to get through recovery alone. We're inexperienced with emotions. We need constructive guidance. Build a support system of recovering people. They have the knowledge and the experience to help. Set up a regular meeting with people who share similar problems. A variety of self-help and recovery groups exist. Identify the problems in our lives that need to be dealt with and make the necessary changes. We should discuss these changes with other recovering people first. Newly recovering addicts and alcoholics frequently act without thinking things through. Avoid procrastination. If we get stuck, we can use others to hold us accountable for taking action. Certain feelings seem to be a persistent problem in the early recovery period. Anger, fear, shame, and grief are the most troublesome emotions. Anger plays a major role in addiction. Unresolved anger or resentment can disrupt our lives. Yet, anger is a normal human emotion that everyone experiences. Anger is emotional response to situations in which we feel threatened, treated unfairly, or violated. Anger is not the issue. The real problem is unresolved anger. When we resolve our anger, we can move on. Unresolved anger is a major cause of relapse to chemical use. We can't afford to be resentful. Resentment is the opposite of forgiveness. Resentment keeps us stuck at a point of pain We may be filled with anger towards someone who doesn't even remember the event that made us angry, or towards someone who's already died. We are the ones who suffered by holding on. Most of us believe that other people, places, and things make us angry. We think that these external factors cause our feelings. We indulge ourselves in righteous anger. Blaming others enables us to hold on to resentments and to avoid having to change ourselves. It lets us operate from a morally superior position. I'm good, you're bad. Our work with emotions in Chapter 8 taught us that our belief system is responsible for how we feel, not other people, places, and things. We can keep this in mind as we explore how we use anger. Anger as a positive force. Anger can be a positive motivator. We have energy that when we feel angry, anger is a part of the body's automatic survival response. Rather than yell, scream, or throw things, we can directly from anger, we can form it into a positive action. A woman whose child died in a car accident started a national group that works to promote safer driving. Her anger produced a life-saving organization. How can we use anger constructively? Tina had promised herself yesterday that she would not drink or drug. This morning she found herself in bed with her clothes on and hungover. She had become intoxicated again. Tina was furious with herself. How could she have been so stupid? This was the last straw. She called a local addiction treatment center to get information and assessment for addiction. She would not let drugs and alcohol ruin her life. Tina was angry because she could not control her chemical use. She used that anger constructively to get help. Her anger became a life-saving tool. We can use our anger to make important changes. We may become angry about a job, an abusive relationship, or a lack of schooling. Our anger can energize us to make changes that will better our lives. If we're mistreated, our anger can provide the courage to assert our needs. Anger is a negative force. Alcoholics and addicts look at life in a fairly self-centered way. We resent what we can't control and want life at our convenience. Many of us use anger in unhealthy ways. The following list grieves reasons and effects of our anger. Anger from lack of control. We're constantly angry with someone or something. Things never happen quickly enough. We encounter tremendous frustration when life doesn't happen according to our plan. The world seems to be against us. People in recovery refer to this way of thinking and acting as the king baby complex. I want what I want when I want it, and I want it now. Anger as a defense. Sometimes we intimidate others with our anger to keep them at a safe distance. Others may give in to our wishes rather than risk an angry scene. Using anger as a defense enables us to remain isolated so others don't get close enough to see all of our faults. Sometimes the best defense is an angry defense. Anger as a mask. Anger can cover grief, hurt, loss, or fear. An angry exterior keeps people from finding out what we're really feeling. The other emotions are much too sensitive to deal with. Being uncomfortable with feelings of anger. We may feel that it's wrong to be angry. When we were younger, we may have been told, "Don't get angry at your baby sister," or "You keep that temper under control." These old tapes reinforce the idea that anger must be a negative thing and that we must never show when we're angry. Such ideas keep us from learning to resolve anger, being overwhelmed by others' anger. While we may have difficulty dealing with our own anger, some of us also don't know how to deal with other people's anger. Some of us also don't know how to deal with other people's anger. We feel powerless and intimidated by other people's anger because we're not sure how to handle it. We quickly withdraw or avoid situations where we might encounter it. We would rather lose out on something than chance someone getting angry with us. We feel powerless, manipulated, and victimized. To us, anger is a weapon that others can use against us. Our inability to cope with anger in a constructive way makes chemical use an attractive relief for the distress. The anger cycle. Expressing our anger improperly creates harmful consequences. We fall into a cycle of responses that keeps us stuck. The anger cycle begins when we perceive that we are treated unjustly or when we experience a lack of control. We need to identify our anger and resolve it. If we are skilled at handling our emotions, we can stop the process. Left unchecked, our anger becomes resentment, and our resentments build. We try to deal with the discomfort in one of three ways. We deny that anger still affects us. We stuff it in our emotional backpack and believe that we have dealt with it. As we continue to stuff our emotions in our backpack, we reach the breaking point, and our anger spills out onto others. We can also turn that anger inward. Inward directed anger can result in depression. We attempt to get even. We perceive that we can even things up or right the injustice through some type of retribution or payback. We can make an outwardly aggressive stance or quietly get our revenge in a roundabout way. We want to win. We use chemicals to relieve the discomfort. The problem with these responses is that they do not resolve the anger. We continue to roll angry thoughts over and over in our minds. Rather than to relieve our anger, we increase our sense of injustice and fuel the cycle. Our burning anger creates a heavy spiritual burden. When we experience anger, it has a direction. In the early stages of recovery, we might direct our anger at one or more of the following: the world in general, because we can no longer use chemicals. We have to deal with our feelings without the use of drugs and alcohol. Family or friends, because they intervene to stop our use or they don't understand what we're going through. Ourselves, for having wasted part of our lives using. Somehow we should have known better. God, our higher power, for making us an addict or alcoholic. Why me? Expressing our anger appropriately. When we're angry, we need to look closely at the reason. How old is our anger? At whom is our anger directed? Are we angry because someone is not doing something our way? We need to zero in on a specific cause. If our anger results from an irrational belief, that belief needs to be challenged. Chapter 8 gave us ideas for dealing with irrational beliefs. Our anger has a rational basis. If it does, we can, if appropriate, let the other person know how we feel. We can calmly use assertive statements such as, "When you behave that way, I feel angry." We don't raise our voices or assume a threatening posture. We want to avoid a verbal contest of who can shout the loudest. If the anger is about a current situation, we can resolve the issue or get out of the situation. We can talk about our feelings with other people. Venting about anger dissipates some of its strength. Forgiving others is a powerful tool for freeing ourselves of resentments. Sometimes there may be no way to right the injustice. It's out of our control. Then we must exercise acceptance. It's called letting go. The understanding that we're powerless to change the situation. The worst things we can do is worry about some past event that we can't change. An angry customer comes into Tony's store and complains about a product she had purchased there. Her tirade got his own anger rising. Tony quickly identified his reaction and saw his beliefs. That no one should ever criticize him, that he must never be wrong, caused his anger. He challenged his beliefs and accepted the customer's complaint as valid. He was able to refrain from an angry response and resolve the problem without emotional distress. Tony had learned skills associated with rational emotive behavior therapy to work through anger issues. He found he did not have to react to others in an angry fashion. He also remembered that it took a lot of practice before he could quickly handle these situations. What are your three most powerful resentments? To whom are they directed? Write this down. Pick one of the resentments you listed in exercise 9A. Use the REBT process described in Chapter 8 to identify and challenge your belief. So A plus B equals C. A, action or event, plus my belief equals my feelings. Was your belief an example of not being in control? If so, how can you resolve your anger? How can you challenge your irrational belief? Fear and worry. Fear is a normal emotion. Overcoming fears moves us forward and creates joy. Fear left unchecked, however, can be a major block to our recovery. Fear is common in early sobriety. Most of us are apprehensive about new situations. Some of us have never functioned in society as a sober individual. The thought of what's ahead can be overwhelming. We learn that the best way to be safe and free from fear is to try to control everything. The problem comes when we have to admit that we have very little control. For alcoholics and addicts, lack of control does not feel safe. It spawns all manners of concerns and fears. Some of us will find it difficult to identify our fear and will turn it into anger. Some of us will find ourselves overwhelmed by fear and feel out of control and panicked. At times we will feel confident, sometimes so much so. Overconfidence and cockiness are dangerous in sobriety. These attitudes minimize the severity of our addiction or the amount of effort needed to work through our fears. We must always give addiction its due respect. For many of us, fear is a way of life, a constant companion. The fears were suppressed with chemicals. They're still there when we get sober. In sobriety, our fears may even be magnified. Some of us have resisted looking at these feelings for years. At times, these excessive fears can paralyze us. Afraid to change, afraid to stay the same. Alcoholics and addicts in early sobriety have many fears in common. Living a life without chemicals. A life without chemicals is a frightening thought. We ask ourselves, how will we cope? What will we do when we feel overwhelmed by emotions? Is our social life centered around using? What excitement could a life without chemicals hold? We see that we have to make changes in our friends, our lifestyle, but we don't have to make all the changes today. We learn and make progress. We have patience and faith in the recovery process. Changing or losing relationships. Perhaps all of our friends are alcoholics and addicts or abuser. Now these people threaten our sobriety. If our spouse or partner is addicted and we've decided not to use, how will our abstinence affect the relationship? Some of our friends are not addicts, but they may occasionally use drugs or alcohol. If we ask them not to use around us, will they still want our company? What will we be like sober? Becoming sober changes how we interact with others. Sometimes the relationships we built while using lose its charm in recovery. It's possible that we will lose some relationships. Sobriety also allows us to have satisfying and happy relationships. We'll be capable of repairing problems in valuable relationships. New friends await us in the recovery community. Facing our future. It's scary to start a whole new way of life. How will we figure out the rules? Will they work for us? Will we be able to stay straight? Sometimes we have to make radical changes in our lives over time. When we experience fear, we may be projecting about the future or living in the past. We may wonder if it's worth trying to sober up. Worrying about the future blocks us from living in the present. We need to live one day at a time. Fear shows a lack of faith in both ourselves and the power of recovery program involving other sober people. Facing the past. No amount of worry or anguish will change the past. It's gone. The past will only have as much power as we choose to give it. We caught up in wondering, if only we would have done this, that things would be different. Maybe we wouldn't be an alcoholic or an addict. How can we make up for past mistakes? This type of worry leads to feelings of anxiety. We can't change the past. It's difficult to deal with the mistakes and the trauma of our past. We wouldn't do these things sober. We fear having to face people we harmed through our alcohol and other drug use. We may have past legal or financial issues that now must be confronted. The past may also hold memories of abuse, abandonment, hopelessness, or shame. We realize that now we must face these issues. We can be overwhelmed by the magnitude of these emotions. Facing others, what other people will think. How can we face anyone? What will they say when they find out? We had our own prejudice against drunks and druggies. Now we wonder if others will shun us when they find out. We find ourselves embarrassed to call and see our old friends. We're ashamed of our addiction. Many of us will try to remain in recovery without making the necessary lifestyle changes. We believe that if we choose not to make the tough changes, we will somehow get by. So long as we stay abstinent, this approach is rarely successful. If we're afraid and can't face recovery alone, we need to ask for help. We can waste a lot of energy dealing with fear. The next time we're caught up in fear and worry, we can think about the following statistics. 40% of our fears never happen. 30% of our fears are about the past, things that can't be changed. 12% of our fears are based on others' criticisms, most of which are untrue. 10% of our fears are about health matters that only get worse with worry. 8% of our fears are legitimate. Think about it. For many of us, 92% of our worries are unproductive. We have the choice to devote time to worrying or enjoying life. What will we choose? We can manage our fear if we take it slowly, piece by piece. Think of fear as face everything and recover. Facing the fear is the first part. With the help of our friends in recovery, we can do together what we can't do alone. Others have been through this before. We can't let them guide us. We can let them guide us. Others who've been there before us. Methods of coping with fear. Accept that fear is normal. We can choose to be uncomfortable just for today rather than use chemicals. Live one day at a time. Worrying about the future or trying to change the past stops us from living in the present. Take problems one at a time. We don't have to resolve problems all at once. We can choose a small problem and work through it with the help of others. Taking problems one at a time reduces the overwhelming nature of our fear. Rely on a higher power. Some of us have a specific concept of a higher power. Fear keeps us stuck. Faith moves us forward. A higher power, trust, faith, and recovering friends can get us through life's challenges. Believe we need to believe in ourselves and in our recovery. Avoid the extremes. We shouldn't be too cocky or too afraid. A little apprehension is healthy. Work as a strong recovery program. Work a strong recovery program. We need to contact recovering friends, attend recovering groups, and help others. Engage in constructive daily activities. Idle time gives us the opportunity to worry about things we can't change. If we can't change something right now, we press the dump it button and forget about it. This method is not scientific, but it is effective. Shame versus guilt. Sometimes we're our hardest critics. We beat ourselves up thinking, if only I would have done this, or I should have stopped my chemical use sooner. These mental gymnastics don't solve our problems and leave us feeling like loathsome creatures. In early recovery, this type of thinking can put us back on track to chemical use. When we feel like pond scum, it's easy to rationalize that we are worthless and might as well use to make ourselves feel better today. When we say that we understand that this is an illness and not a moral weakness, but most of us still feel dishonorable. Addiction is like being branded, and we feel humiliated. We feel exposed as weak in the eyes of family and friends. Guilt and shame are familiar companions to us. There is an important difference between guilt and shame. Guilt says I made a mistake. I violated the law or my personal values. Shame says I am a mistake. Shame is counterproductive in recovery. It says that we make a mistake. If we make a mistake, it's because we're inherently flawed or as a person. We are not as good as others or not worthy of a good life. For some of us, these things are not new and precede our addiction. Using chemicals becomes a way of dealing with them. Shame can put us in a dark hole with feelings of despair and self-loathing. Why try to recover or to become who we would like to be when we are naturally flawed? By its nature, shame keeps us from talking to others about how we're feeling. A key factor in recovery. We may believe that exposing our feelings to others will lead to rejection. We're already rejected ourselves. Why wouldn't others also abandon us? This thinking blocks our recovery and invites us to drink or drug away our pain. We see our addiction as a personal failure, not as a treatable illness. We can start to change our perception of ourselves by having honest interactions with other recovering people. It's reassuring to find that many of them have the same feelings. When someone we perceive as a good person and having it all together talks about his or her own personal battle with shame, we realize we're not alone. When we're open about ourselves and our issues, others react positively to us. This challenges my belief that we are worthless. We learn that these are destructive feelings and they're only our perception of who we are, not reality. We see that if we are motivated and willing to risk exploring ourselves, we can make significant changes in our lives. When we're feeling inadequate, we can take a moment to consider what's really happening. We frequently find that our reaction is inaccurate. We can ask ourselves, am I inadequate or am I just unexperienced? We may find that we are simply inexperienced in that skill or topic. It's not a matter of personal failure. We can learn to become competent if we so choose. We're reminded that our expectations of ourselves are unrealistically high. Unrealistic expectations lead to feelings of frustration and inadequacy. List 2 events that you feel shameful about. Explain these feelings with another recovering person. What is his or her perspective? As you learned in Chapter 8, your feelings result from your belief system. Pick one of the shameful experiences that you listed. Apply the REBT principles from Chapter 8. A plus B equals C. An action or event plus my belief equals my feelings. What was your belief system telling you about the event? Is that belief valid? Grief and the grieving process. Grief is the emotional pain we suffer from loss. When we grieve, we go through several stages, a process. The grieving process is not necessarily predictable. We may jump back and forth from stage to stage. Any loss, big or small, may trigger the grieving process. We might grieve the loss of a person, place, or relationship. We may grieve a consequence of our chemical use or what might have been. The degree of our sense of loss depends on the intensity of our attachment to who or what was lost, or the depth of our loss. What others believe about our loss is unimportant. The loss of a loved pet may feel more devastating than the loss of an abusive husband. What is important is that we recognize our loss and begin to resolve it. Grieving is common in early recovery. We may have suppressed our grief over the loss of a child, spouse, partner, parent, or other relationship by using drugs or alcohol. We have only postponed the inevitability of having to deal with the resulting grief. Grief is a process that needs to be faced and completed. To do less is to continually be caught in the cycle. Grieving can take place in stages. Denial. We deny or ignore the reality of what's happened. We refuse to face the facts. We rationalize or make excuses to avoid feeling hurt. Anger. We're angry that something we value has been taken away. It does not seem fair. We don't feel in control. Our anger is sometimes directed at the person we lost. How could you do this to me? Bargaining. We look for some way to regain what we've lost. We pray for our loss to be reinstated in some way. We may blame ourselves and promise to change. Depression. We come to realize that the person, place, or thing is truly gone. Acceptance. We come to accept the loss as a reality and move on. Even when we accept loss, our feelings do not disappear. When we reflect on the person, place, or thing, we feel sadness. Acceptance does not mean that we eliminated our feelings and are no longer emotionally involved. We simply accept the reality of our loss and how it affects our lives. We can still feel the sadness. Not resolving grief can result in becoming stuck at some stage of the process. We may jump back to an earlier stage or skip back and forth. We can carry anger and resentment, a sense of abandonment, or a feeling of being incomplete for years. Time alone does not heal all wounds. Time and attention will lessen the severity and impact of our feelings. We put our loss into perspective and move on with our lives. In some cases, we experience guilt, and in the grieving process, it's normal to continue to sometimes direct our anger at the very person we've lost. We feel guilty about doing this and try to deny our feelings. A good person wouldn't feel this way. Our grief most of us experiences is the loss of our chemicals. When we're confronted with our alcohol or other drug problems, we deny that it's true. When we finally realize the truth, we become angry. The thought of losing our way of dealing with the world can leave us fearful. We try to bargain. Perhaps we can use just once in a while or use a different chemical. When the reality of not being able to control our use hits home, we become depressed. As we begin to understand our addiction, we learn to accept it and live with it. List some significant losses in your life. Which has been the most painful? What stage of the grieving process are you in? How does it affect your life today? What is one method you could use to help in accepting this loss? Ask others in recovery for help in developing a method of resolution. Discuss these feelings with recovering friends to gain more insight. Some of us may want to do graduate work on our emotions. The best way to explore our emotions and behavior is through daily journaling. If we keep a daily journal of how we're feeling, we gain skill in identifying our emotions. We begin to recognize behaviors that we can change. We also may find distinct patterns in our feelings. Journaling works best when it's done on a daily basis. Get a notebook or a journal. Try to choose the most significant incident of each day. What event seemed most important or triggered the greatest emotional response within you? Try to be very specific about how you were feeling sad and how you were feeling and what happened. You may want to use the feelings list in chapter 8. So you can try the following format. In your journal, on one line, write down the issue. Talk about what happened. Another line, talk about the emotions. What emotions or feelings did the event trigger within me? On another line, what does this tell me about myself? How does my reaction fit with what I believe? How can I be different? How can I change? How can I start to react in a healthier manner? Issue. A friend asked me to do something I didn't think was right. I said yes and went along with it, even though I was uncomfortable. Issue. A friend asked me to do something I don't think was right. I said yes and went along with it, even though I was uncomfortable. Emotions, anger, fear. What does this tell me about myself? It points out that I'm still trapped in my need to approval from others. I get angry within myself when I don't stand up for what I believe. I fear what others will think of if I speak up. I fear the conflict that may result if I disagree. This focuses on my belief that if I speak up, everything will fall apart. The conflict is not okay, that I will sacrifice my personal beliefs for approval. How can I be different? I can be more responsive to my true feelings and confront them immediately rather than stuff them. This requires me to be more honest and to risk that someone will disapprove. I can believe that feeling better about myself takes priority over what someone else thinks. We can look through our journals occasionally to see patterns in our behavior. As we start to analyze and identify ways to change, we start to make progress. It takes time and work to initiate change in our thinking and behaviors. We shouldn't fall prey to impatience, but keep going. Remember, learning to talk about feelings is a crucial part of recovery. When dealing with troublesome emotions, we need to use coping skills, communicate with others, and make changes. 4. Emotions seem to persist in early recovery: anger, fear, shame, and grief. We may have used drugs and alcohol to suppress these emotions. Anger can be expressed in a positive way. Unresolved anger or resentment keeps us stuck and miserable in the anger cycle. We need to examine the reason for our anger and work to resolve it. Realizing we can't control everything can make us fearful. We can tackle fears piece by piece. Guilt says, I made a mistake. Shame says, I am a mistake. Honesty with ourselves and others helps us improve our perception of ourselves. Grief is the emotion, pain we suffer from a loss. The 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. We may grieve the loss of our chemicals. Daily journaling helps us work through our emotions. Let's take a break.